Faith Salie is the author of Approval Junkie, My Heartfelt and Occasionally Inappropriate Quest to Please Just About Everyone and Ultimately Myself, which has been called a magic mix of vulnerability and jest. Her one-woman show based on the book had its world premiere at the Alliance Theater in Atlanta in 2019. Judy Melinek, MD, is a graduate of Harvard College and earned her medical degree and completed a residency in pathology at UCLA. Her further training in forensics at the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner is the subject of the memoir Working Stiff, 2 Years, 262 Bodies, and the Making of a Medical Examiner, co-authored with her husband, writer T.J. Mitchell. Melinek and Mitchell have launched a medical examiner detective series with the mystery novel First Cut, and tonight we are celebrating the sequel, Aftershock. Enjoy the show, everyone.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Erica. Wait, it's very late here because I'm in New York and I need to make sure. Did Erica tell everyone that y'all are married?
Oh, I don't know.
Yes, she mentioned that I am Judy's husband.
Yes.
Okay. And do you like being known as Judy's husband, TJ?
Yeah, I don't mind. It's fine.
And so you're in New Zealand. Let's just set the stage. What time is it there?
3 o'clock?
It is 3 p.m. tomorrow. We're coming at you from the future. It's Saturday.
What's it like in the future? Tell us.
There's no COVID.
There's no COVID, and
it's a miracle.
It's a little cloudy. Yeah.
All right, so we're very global. This is kind of like Doctors Without Borders. We're like doctors, authors, booksellers, sans frontières. Now, I just want to start out by making sure that we're all talking about the same Aftershock, because in doing my research, you may or may not know, I found a book called Aftershock: Overcoming His Secret Life with Pornography, A Plan for Recovery. That's not this. Then there's Aftershock, an intergalactic space opera series, a Trade Point Saga Book 2. Yep. Subtitle: Stranded Amid the Stars, Fighting for Survival. That's not this. And then last year, Sylvia Day, renowned author Sylvia Day, wrote a novel whose back cover warns, never mix business with pleasure, never bring politics into the bedroom. In a way, I did both when I took Jackson Rutledge as a lover. I can't say I wasn't warned.
Okay.
That's not this either.
That's not this book.
It's a common name, I guess.
Yes.
And then there's also
let's talk about this Aftershock, the only one that matters. I'm going to read this book summary, just so people are up to speed. It is always a challenge to talk about this series, the first being First Cut, the Jessie Teska series, without giving things away, because there are great mysteries and suspense. But I suspect someone was paid a lot of money to get these words right. So I'm going to read them so everybody gets the idea of this story if they haven't read the book yet. And of course, everyone here should buy it tonight. All right, there's a body crushed under a load of pipes on a San Francisco construction site, and medical examiner Dr. Jessie Teska is on call. So it's her job to figure out who it is, and her headache when the autopsy reveals that the death is a homicide staged as an accident. Jessie is hot on the murderer's trail, then an earthquake sends her and the whole city reeling. When the dust clears, her case has fallen apart, and an innocent man is being framed. Jessie knows she's the only one who can prove it and races to piece together the truth before it gets buried, literally, and brings her down in the rubble. With Melinek and Mitchell's trademark blend of propulsive prose, I love that, deft plotting and mordant humor, this rollicking new installment in the Jessie Teska mystery series will shake you up and leave you rattled. Propulsive prose is I love it. It's very aggressive. I think it's fair. This was definitely, this is such a page turner. And I have to ask, when I read your first novel, First Cut, I had to put it down several times because the details of the autopsies and the bodies were really, I mean, you write so evocatively. They were really overwhelming. And I didn't have to do that with this novel. So I wonder if I'm just more suited now, like I've gotten used to, I'll put on my scrubs, or did you make any sort of decision as writers to like pull back a little from the gory details?
don't think we did. I mean, I think you're just used to it. And it's actually a very natural thing to get used to it over time, because that's what we do as forensic professionals. Like the first time I did an autopsy, I felt nauseated. I had to take a break and go outside and catch my breath and then go back in. And what I tell doctors and medical students who come and rotate through the morgue is, if you are disgusted or, nauseated and you leave, but you find yourself outside going, oh, I wish I could go back in there because I want to know what happened, then you're meant to be a forensic pathologist. Because that's the thing, is that all of us have that visceral reaction initially. We just learn to get over it because we're so fascinated by what we do.
And if we're a little gentler with our readers this time, you can thank our brilliant editor, John Glynn. At Hanover Square Press, because he did, as I recall, dial us back a little bit.
Maybe a little, but let's be fair. There
are adjectives about the bodies.
The phrase that haunts me from this book is decomp juice, which is exactly what you think it is. So it's still there, and I will feel that as a reader, I went from medical student to actual MD, maybe, right?
It is important to us not to be grotesque. We try to represent what Dr. Melinek and her colleagues actually do in real life without writing a horror novel. This is not a horror novel at all.
Are you going to call Judy, Dr. Melinek, the woman that you've been married to for like 100 years beside you, Dr. Melinek, this whole interview?
I might. I sometimes do.
It's
and
adorable,
the reason
really.
for that is because I've been in the audience when Dr. Melinek is on stage with two other doctors who are men, and they are addressed as Dr. Smith and Dr. Jones, and she's called Judy. Or she's called sometimes Dr. Judy. So I watched her go through medical school, and I know what it entails. And residency and everything else. And I know how hard it is to earn that title. So I'm very, very respectful of all doctors, actually. And I usually call them Dr. So-and-so. Here in New Zealand, they don't like that. People always use their first name. But I always start out calling people Dr. So-and-so. Or if I really need to get her attention, actually, what I do is I call her Dottoressa, which is Italian for doctor.
It's the feminine, lady doctor.
Right.
Well, it's clearly feminine. Dottoressa. I feel like naming my daughter that. That's
doctor is, the noun is gendered in Italian. So I sometimes...
Because
that really gets her attention.
When I'm really hyper focused on something, I don't listen, and so he'll say "doctor" to get my attention. Because
like,
otherwise,
that doesn't work. Then it's Dottoressa.
All right. I think we should start by playing a little game I want to call "Let's Get to Know Our Protagonist."
Okay.
If you had to write an online dating profile.
Oh wow!
Jessica. Now, by the way, this. Your books are not romances by any means.
But there is romance.
There is romance, and there's also sex, which is both.
Yeah, I'm not trying to call it romance.
But I don't want you to think I'm being sexist. If you had a male doctor, I would ask the same. So okay. I wrote a little like online dating profile for her. But what would y'all put if she were, I don't know, what would she even be on? Tinder? Not eHarmony. I don't know.
You're forgetting, you're not forgetting that we have been a couple since we were 18 years old.
I know. You've never gone online. Neither have I. But what do you think she would put in her profile?
I think that she would downplay the fact that she's a forensic pathologist, because whenever someone meets someone like me or like Jesse, the first thing we do is we get all these questions about what is it like? Is it just like it is on TV? And then you end up, I would, if I were single, end up spending the entire date talking about my job, which is the last thing I want to do. I want to talk about other things.
Which is why she's delighted. This is not a spoiler, but she is delighted that in the course of the book, she starts talking to someone who really wants to hear about her job. Yeah. And so she can open up about that. Yes.
That's interesting. Judy, so when people say, what do you do? You're usually met with a whole bunch of exuberant, eager questions, and then it just kind of peters out when you're like...
It does. Well, it's the hard part is that people don't realize that I'm honest in answering them. I'm not going to lie. And so they'll ask questions, and I sometimes say, oh, like what's the worst case you've ever done? That's the most common question I get. But I just say, I don't know what's a horrible way to die. And I was like, I'm not going to tell, like you really don't want to know.
Yeah.
And sometimes they keep pushing, and then I tell them, and then they're like, yeah, you're right. I didn't want to know that.
Asked you that. Yeah, the first chapter, our first book, Working Stiff, is a nonfiction book about
New York Times bestseller.
It is a New York Times bestseller, yes. And the chapter one of Working Stiff,
chapter.
the title is "This Can Only End Badly," because I started telling people in like in social situations, if Judy is telling you a story and it involves a guy going up on a ladder with a power tool, remember, this can only end badly.
And so like we'd go to cocktail parties and we'd be together and people would strike up a conversation with me, and TJ would always be the one to be like, dude, you don't want to ask her. Just really don't go there.
And I think Jessie would be the same way. So I don't know if she would say in her dating profile, must be able to handle the truth or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So for people who haven't yet read First Cut or haven't read Aftershock yet, don't you like how I'd be really good on like QVC?
You are.
I'm really showing the product. Thank you. So single white female, 30s, not squeamish. I like a good cocktail or 3, but will not infrequently have to jump out of bed at 3 a.m. to go to a crime scene, right? I curse in Polish frequently and vividly. Not afraid of intimacy with dead people, not looking for a commitment, dedicated to my beagle. Is that fair?
Excellent.
It's very good.
That would be excellent.
I like that. I don't think she'd mention the Polish cursing, because I think she does that
that's instinctive.
when she doesn't really want to. I think it's a reflex. I don't know that she would necessarily put that in her profile.
And
but certainly be her beagle would be very important.
And I wouldn't say that she's not looking for a commitment. I mean, I think deep down inside she's want commitment. She's in a committed relationship at a certain point. So I think long term we do see her looking for love.
And she does need to find someone who understands how much she loves her job, that it's not a competition, right?
Correct.
Yeah, don't forget that Jessie is a noir detective. Detective.
Stop right there. You just anticipated one of my questions. What does noir actually mean? We all say it, but I didn't. We all went to college together, everybody. I didn't concentrate in English like you did, TJ. So tell us what noir means as a genre.
I concentrate in English, but you don't learn about noir detective fiction when you're an English major, because it's considered genre fiction, right? Which is not literature generally, but it can be. Some of the great literature written in American English is, as I think, noir detective fiction. And there's a big divide between cozies and noir. Cozies is like the greatest writer of cozies was probably Agatha Christie.
Yeah, Miss Marple, that kind of stuff.
You have an ordered society where there's a murder, the detective comes in, solves the murder, and everything goes back to a nice orderly society. Noir is the opposite of that. Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett are the grandfathers of it. And the detective is in a city that's already broken. It's almost always a city.
And corrupt.
It's broken and corrupt, and a murder happens, and the detective solves the murder. But in solving the murder, the detective may make things worse for everybody, including himself. And it's almost always himself in the classic novels.
Yeah.
And so Jessie is a noir detective who is a woman in contemporary San Francisco, and that's the pattern that we follow.
Yeah, and there's
that's such a good description of noir. And
there are good movies too that are noir that we think of, like LA Confidential, Chinatown. Those are classic noir movies.
All right, and also I just want to get some terms straight. Is there a difference? People say ME for medical examiner, right? And you, Judy, are known as a forensic pathologist. Is there a difference?
Yes, there is. So medical examiner is the name of the system, and the forensic pathologist is the name of the medical specialty, the name of the doctor. So a forensic pathologist can work in a medical examiner system, which is one where the death investigation for the county, and it's usually done on a county basis, is run by doctors, versus working for a coroner or sheriff coroner, as I worked for in Alameda County in Oakland, in which the forensic pathologist works for a death investigation system that's run by law enforcement. So sheriff coroner would be law enforcement, and sometimes just the term coroner, it's an administrator. It could be a doctor, but it's usually not a forensic pathologist who runs the office, and they're often elected officials. They may have no training whatsoever in death investigation.
And is your job title now that you've moved to New Zealand? Are you still technically a forensic pathologist?
Yes, I will always be a forensic pathologist because that's my training background.
That's your tattoo. It says
That's-
once forensic pathologist.
That's right. That's the medical subspecialty that goes across all different systems.
Like neurologist or oncologist. It's a specialty of medicine. But now I am working for the Ministry of Justice through the coroner system. So they have a
God,
coroner.
that makes you sound like a superhero, which you are.
Yeah, like by appointment of the Queen.
I even brought my cape.
The Ministry of Justice. That's so, and I bet it sounds really good with a New Zealand accent, which I can't do.
Which I can't do, so don't ask me.
So like you, Jessie loves what she does. I think she gets severely concussed in this book twice, which is more than Nancy Drew. Nancy Drew takes it on the head so very often.
The Hardy Boys is always the solar plexus, which I'm not even sure it exists.
I don't know.
Anyway.
And I just want to read, I love this. This is very early on in the book. This is what I'm here for. This is one of the many reasons I think people love your books, is it's a really accessible way into a world we wouldn't otherwise know, see, or understand. So it's also the way you write it. So here we go. The pericardial, this is in Jessie's voice, right? She's always the narrator. The pericardial sac was distended and rigid. I cut it open and collected 300 milliliters of bright blood. I removed the heart, turned it around in my hand. By the way, she just says that. I removed the heart, turned it around in my hand. That's normal. And immediately, it is normal for you.
Yes.
And immediately found the source. A ragged defect in the thick muscle of the posterior left ventricular wall. Well, we found the end of the wound track, I said. Let's see what's inside. I brought the heart to the foot of the autopsy table and the students crowded around. I dissected it. No bullet. Ted, I crowed, genuinely excited. I think I've got a bullet embolus. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Embolus here. Good for you. How do you say Ted's last name?
Gwen.
Gwen? You said Gwen?
Nguyen.
Nguyen, thank you. Nguyen. Good for you, Nguyen muttered. Anyone know what this is? I asked the students. They didn't. If this is a gunshot wound, I said, and if the bullet stopped here in the left ventricle without getting lodged in the muscle tissue, then it's possible that with the next heartbeat, it got pumped into the aorta. I pushed a finger into the aortic valve to show them how easy that would be. From there, the slug might have surfed the pressurized bloodstream through smaller and smaller arteries until it got stuck. That's a bullet embolus. They're exceptionally rare! Exclamation point.
Yeah, that's Jessie is echoing Judy. Like Judy and a lot of her colleagues, they don't get excited about gunshot wounds because, you know, piece of lead goes in, piece of lead goes out, it cuts something, no big deal. They like medical mysteries. Yeah. And a bullet embolus is a mystery. Like, where did it end up? Is it an embolus? Yeah.
And is that one of those things, Judy, where you're like, oh man, let me tell you the first time I found a bullet embolus. Is that what you all would talk about if you were doing a exercise?
Yeah. We do talk about it because it's one of those kind of, the number one thing that we have to do when we do a gunshot wound case is you have to find the bullet because that's the evidence. And it's the bullet which allows you to match it to the gun in some cases if the gun's recovered. So,
except for perforating wounds, which
if the bullet goes in and out, then you don't have to look for the bullet. But
then it's the police and the crime scene problem to find the bullet. But if it's a penetrating wound and there's no exit wound, then you have to come up with that bullet. Then it's on me.
So if we do X-rays and we see a bullet on the X-ray, then we have to recover it. If we have what looks like a bullet track and there's no bullet on the X-ray, then we need an explanation for where the bullet went. And in some cases, what happens is, like this scenario is suggesting, that the heart would pump the bullet to other parts of the body. So then we have to do full body X-rays to try to see where the bullet got pumped. And I've had bullet emboli go into the liver. I've had them go to an extremity like an arm or a leg. It's a rare occurrence and it's kind of exciting when it happens, but it definitely makes for a much longer autopsy.
And I'm with you. I love a scene like that because the reason that we're writing these books is because we wanted to write mysteries that show the reality of what a medical examiner does and then go off from that and you know, invent a detective story around. But I also love that it shows an important part of Jessie's character, which is she really does love her job. And that's part of what drives her to be such an effective detective. She's not going to let it go.
Yeah. Judy, I mean, it's clear that your joy is part of the mystery that you're very devoted to what you do. But in your words, what do you love about what you do? Why do you love what you do so much?
Oh, it's number one is because it's a mystery every single day. I always compare it to Forrest Gump. You know, life's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Well, that's death too. In the mortuary every day when we go in, I don't know what I'm going to get. It's basically anybody who's died in the past 24 hours from any sudden, unnatural, or violent death. So any given day, I'm thrown a new slate of deceased individuals or a new group of deceased individuals, and it's my job to figure out why they died. And the most challenging cases always come to the medical examiner, because if someone goes to the hospital and the doctors can figure out why they died, the doctors in the hospital write the death certificate. Even if they die at home and they have a regular doctor, that doctor is going to get asked to write the death certificate. We only get asked to do an autopsy or do a death investigation when nobody else knows why, when their own doctors don't know why they died.
We have a moment in First Cut, the first novel, where Jessie is looking out the window and she sees a guy walking down the street with his shirt off, and he's got this big knot sort of thing in his abdomen, and she knows that it's a tumor of some kind. It's out of control. It's probably not been diagnosed, and that guy's going to end up on her table at some point. Judy has diagnosed cancer in people where she was the doctor who diagnosed it after they died.
Right. So we're primary care physicians, but for people who don't go to doctors.
Oh, whoa. Yeah, that is crazy and makes sense. I've always wondered, when there's a body on the table in front of you, do you know that person's name? I mean, obviously there are probably some
not always
people, not always, but do you sometimes, like, is there a connection to like the humanity through the name and the age and the whatever, the piercings or what?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, before we go into the mortuary, we do usually get documentation about the circumstances of death. And I have had a few instances where people who I knew or I had interactions with had passed away, and I didn't know that they had died. And I found out about it before I went into the mortuary. So I didn't do that autopsy. Like we will, exclude ourselves or recuse ourselves from doing autopsies on people that we know. Not only would it be a conflict of interest, but it would be emotionally a lot more jarring, obviously. But in terms of the, evaluating a dead body, we write about this to some degree in Working Stiff, is that you have to be able to separate yourself from the dead body as being a person. I always think about the person who's died as not being there anymore. Like the dead body's just like a shell, and their spirit, who they were, their sense of humor, all that stuff, that's gone with their spirit. And what I'm there to evaluate the shell of what's left. And mostly my patients are not the dead body. I think of my patients as being their family members. So I'm there to answer the questions for their family who have a pressing concern and want to know why they died.
Judy is a doctor, and like any doctor, she has to separate herself emotionally from her work on a human body. And for her, in some ways, it's easier than it is for our clinician friends, because she doesn't tell her patient, listen, you've really got to stop smoking now, or it's going to kill you. And then the patient comes back in 6 months and is still smoking. She
I don't have that frustration.
The end of the story, and then she's able to tell the complete story.
It is hard. I mean, it is emotionally, can be very hard, but not so much when I'm with the dead bodies. It's more when I'm talking to their grieving family members. Then it can get emotionally difficult.
Yeah, I read an interview with you all that really moved me, where you pointed out that it is not the gruesome, macabre cases that are the difficult part of your job. It is the painful conversations and explanations you have to give to the living.
And we have a little bit of that in Aftershock as well, that, Jessie goes out and talks to family members, and it's part of her death investigation to do that. We try to really hew close to what a forensic pathologist would actually do. We don't have her taking on the role of the police, but we do have her doing a death investigation, which is part of her job. And I've done pretty much everything that she's done, putting myself in physical danger.
In the morgue.
But in the morgue. Well, also, no, even on scenes, you know, so when I go out to a scene, what she's doing at the scene is identical to what I would be doing. When Jessie is talking to the family members of the deceased and answering their questions or asking them questions to find out more, I do that too. So that's part of my job.
A lot of the investigative work that Jessie does in this book, again, this is not a spoiler, Judy would do over the phone.
I would do that, yeah.
Right. But we actually have Jessie getting out and going and visiting people in their offices and things like that to get her out from behind the desk.
Yeah, and I've done that too. I mean, family members sometimes come into the mortuary and will meet with us. We have a family conference room. I've been deposed in lawyers' offices where I've met family members sometimes. I've gone to court and testified just like Jessie does. So all of that is part of the job. And that's kind of the point. I mean, like, we want to get her out there so people understand what a forensic pathologist actually does.
She's so much fun. I just love getting her out there and seeing what she's going to do.
Oh, yeah. And I love the way you talk about her, TJ, as if she's telling you what she's going to do. I know that in your sort of writing chemistry, I understand both from knowing you and from interviewing you before that, TJ, you take the lead on actually composing the text, and you all come up with the stories together and you continue to tweak, right, Judy?
Right. So what typically happens is we go for a walk and we discuss the plot and what's going to happen next at whatever point we are in the book. Then I usually, at the end of the walk, I will send TJ an email. I'll dictate it into my phone and email it to him. He then the next day will type up whatever it is we were talking about. I come home from work, from doing autopsies, and then while he's making dinner in the kitchen right back there, I will read to him whatever it is he's just written that day. And in the process of reading it out loud to him, I might make changes or say, no, we've got to fix this. And then usually the next morning, early in the morning before I go to work, I will tweak it and send it and email it back to him. So then it goes back and forth like that.
With this book, we wrote it a different way than First Cut. We outlined this book extensively, so that when we would go for a walk and Judy would write down what the story is, she gave it to me and I would slot it into the outline wherever it needed to be. Right. And then when the outline was done, I could sit down and I actually printed the outline out, and I had a red pen, and every line item I would cross it out with red pen and continue all the way down to the bottom of the page and then shred that page, which is a great feeling, especially because we have a bunny rabbit at home in San Francisco. We did. And so all those shreddings went into the bunny's cage, and that was
that's nice.
That was
purple of love.
Yeah. Yes. It helped me. It helped me keep my humility about the worth of.
Oh, right. Yes. Because.
Yes. But I also found something that fiction writers I've read them said, it happened with First Cut, where Jessie was just coming out through my fingertips while I was typing. Yeah. It was like I was channeling her. It was weird. I was going like, whoa, where are you going with this now? Hold it. Whoa. It was really spooky. And that does happen. Yeah.
But he also has the advantage of every time he gets stuck, he just comes to me and goes, okay, I'm stuck.
Oh, God, yes.
I'm at this point in the story, and we need to get to that point, and what happens next? And
imagine that, writers. I don't have the fear of a blank page. I just ask Dr. Melinek what happens next.
And I tell him what happens next.
I love knowing that Jessie comes through your fingertips, because there were times in reading this that I'm just taken with the fact that you are a heterosexual guy, and you have such a way. I keep saying you because is it fair, Judy, to say he takes the lead in composing the sentences, right?
He does compose the sentences.
But let's just say y'all. But
in my head, though, I mean, he knows how I think. So there's definitely
these books are written in the first person.
And so I mean, I have a note in my book that says, "Are you sure you're a straight guy?" And then there's another note that says, where is it? It said, hold on, it's on page 203. I wrote, "Amazing showing, not telling. There are so many ways to be a dick." So Jessie is, you capture the most sort of repulsive aspects of a certain kind of men with such eloquence. And Jessie is dismissed by male detectives, by construction workers, by the dude at the Department of Building Inspection. And then there's this great scene with a surgeon, a male surgeon. He's patronizing, he's sighing, he's delivering information, like limited information, and looking at his expensive watch until she pulls out her heavy duty deputy chief medical examiner shield. And So
TJ's seen me do this. I would have to say he's come with me to crime scenes. There was a time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This is something we don't really reflect in our books
Yeah.
because our books are, are noir and we're trying to create conflict. But when Judy shows up at the crime scene, the detectives are very deferential.
Yeah.
They want to hear what the doctor has to say. And they treat her with a lot of respect in my experience. Anyway.
Yeah. But he's also heard me bitch and moan about certain individuals not necessarily following through or not listening to me. I mean, this is part of spousal privilege as I come home at the end of the day and I'm like, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what happened today. So he gets to hear it from my end. So that's why I said he can totally get in my head.
But I mean, we compared Jessie to the angel of death wearing her windbreaker that says medical examiner, because people see those words and whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, spousal privilege sounds so much more exciting than white male privilege. I would totally embrace spousal privilege.
Look at me, I get both.
Awesome. Yeah. Yes, you get both. But so Judy, is obviously this is fiction and stuff is heightened, but have you experienced dismissal, based on your gender in your career, even though people are deferential to Dr. Melinek?
Oh, all the time. I mean, it's not an unusual occurrence. I mean, women in medicine all know this, that especially if you look young and inexperienced, which Jessie is, earlier in my career, it was definitely a lot more common for people to dismiss me. And even anytime I start a new job, there's always the first few months when police are like, what is she talking about? Does she know what she's talking about? And then you tell them things and they're like, oh, I guess she does know what she's talking about.
But do you think that the police are that way with the male pathologists too? Are they that way with everybody?
I don't know.
They're highly skeptical people, especially homicide detectives.
That's
trust
the thing.
Nothing that comes through anybody's.
That's the thing. So, I mean, I don't know how they treat the men because I just know how they treat me.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely, especially when I've started a new job, I've definitely sensed that I have to kind of prove myself. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a woman or because I'm new at the job. That's all. And I've been doing this for 20 years now. And I just started a new job 6 months ago. And I still kind of got that sense where on one of my cases, I was getting questioned in such a way that I was like, are they making fun of me? Or are they, because the questions were such that they were challenging me. And I was like, are they making fun of me? Or do they really just not know? And I couldn't figure it out.
You were like,
thank you for picking up on that though, Faith. It's really interesting. Yeah. I have sisters and I was raised by, my mother is tuned in right now, I think, is a very strong woman who was a middle school principal for her career.
Nice.
No go from anybody.
Yes, that takes a lot of gumption.
Yeah.
And we also have 2 daughters who are teenage daughters who don't let us get away with anything.
And my mom doesn't let us get away with anything either. My mom was a teacher as well.
So I think that Jessie might reflect all of those actual influences in our real lives.
I'm looking at the clock. I have 2 pages of questions. I can't believe how time is flying. I'm going to skip around a bit because I know there are people who also want to ask questions. We have to talk about place. We have to talk about San Francisco. This is, for me, the mark of a beautiful story is also that it couldn't happen anywhere else, that story, and it couldn't happen to anybody else, right? Or because of anybody else. And I wonder, as you sit there in New Zealand, if thinking about San Francisco kind of makes you wistful. I should say it's, there's a very California earthquake in this book. Jessie lives in a old cable car, Mahoney Brothers number 45, which is
a real thing. Yep.
Is it?
Yes.
It sounds so cool.
Yeah, there's this neighborhood that was called Carville, right out by the sea, where there were a bunch of old streetcars and cable cars that were past their usable time. They were dumped there, and so people just started living in them. And there are none in the actual neighborhood where Jessie is, in the Richmond district, where we place her. But cable car houses like that did exist, and some of them still do exist.
Yeah, they do exist, and they're sometimes built into existing residences, so they just get expanded and built up. Just the structures.
But yeah, we miss San Francisco very much. San Francisco is the city that we chose to move to. Neither of us is from there. I grew up in Nahant, Massachusetts, right next to Lynn, where Jessie comes from. Right. And Judy is an immigrant to the United States from Israel who came to the United States when she was 5 and grew up in New York. Right. And then we both ended up in San Francisco for 18 years. We love that city and we want to return. But we feel very, very fortunate to be here in Wellington, and New Zealand.
Yeah, and my mom's still in San Francisco. Our son and daughter. We have 2 adult kids who are still in the Bay Area. So
I think what's interesting about now that I really understand what noir is about how you shine a light, like a Klieg light, on how seamy San Francisco can be, how there's corruption and graft, and it's still it's always a love letter to the city with whatever you all write.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a big compliment.
Yeah.
And that's important too. I mean, I think even in Working Stiff, New York City was a character in the book because we love New York. And it's hard not to live in a place and be taking care of the people in that place through my role as a medical examiner without loving it eventually, you know, with all its flaws.
And the people in it.
Yeah, and the people in it. And I hope that we capture it also in terms of the characters, because we try to definitely give the multicultural aspect of San Francisco credit. And we didn't realize how challenging this would be, by the way, for the audiobook because of all the different accents. But that's the nature of San Francisco, is that it's a real multicultural environment with people coming, immigrants from all over the place. So
you have, as main, meaningful characters in the book, you always have Irina, who is, she's an immigrant is she from Ukraine?
Yes.
Irina.
She's based on one of my texts. I don't know if Elena is watching, but she's based on you, Elena.
Yeah. Does Elena take an electric saw with much vigor and much griping to saw apart bodies? That's so rad.
She's retired now, but yes, I miss her. But yes.
There's
Elena.
Jesse's best friend is a beautiful lady named Sparkle, who runs a bail bond service, and her cousin Baby Mike, who's 6'4", 280, an amazing and very serious Black man, right? Then she's got an Indian American boyfriend, sort of. An Asian American public defender is in this book. There's a Mexican worker who's accused of a crime. Yeah. Did you, when you were conceiving this story for this novel, did you want very much to implicitly tackle immigration and how problematic it is and how fraught it is and how unfair it is?
Yes. I mean, I'm an immigrant, and we did because of our own immigrant roots, and because Jessie herself is a daughter of an immigrant. We could not imagine writing, they always say, write what you know. And we could not imagine writing a character that didn't have shallow immigrant roots like we do. I'm an immigrant. I came to the States when I was 5. I remember what it's like.
Shallow immigrant group?
Shallow roots.
Yeah, shallow roots. Yeah, like we doesn't go for money.
Oh,
Judy
herself, TJ's expression, actually.
Judy herself doesn't come from the United States. And
I'm an immigrant.
I am a 2nd and 3rd generation American. So it's not like we, got off the Mayflower.
And both of us grew up with family members who did not speak the language in the country that we were in. My grandmother spoke Polish. His grandmother spoke Italian, or great-grandmother spoke Italian. And so we were steeped in immigrant culture growing up in a family with extended relatives. So that's an important part.
And connections to the old world.
That's
also,
true,
too.
yeah. So that's an important part of why we wrote Jessie as we did, is because the Polish background is something that the 2 of us share. TJ is quarter Polish on his mom's side, and I'm Polish Jew on my mom's side.
How do
we
you
both
say
had Polish-speaking grandparents. Yeah.
Can I try saying Jessie? I'm just guessing. Jessie's name, in her real name is Polish. Is it Czesława?
Czesława.
Yeah. And I have to know this. I mean, she does curse in Polish and has a few phrases. How do you say "What's up, kitty cat," which is something what your grandparents used to say to you?
My grandmother, jak się masz, koteczko? What's up, pussycat? But yeah, I grew up hearing Polish. I don't speak it. We had to have a Polish consultant to make sure that we had the phrases right. And the book has actually been translated into Polish, which is so fascinating to me, because I've asked our Polish readers, like, how do they distinguish the Polish that she's speaking from the English that she's speaking when the whole book is in Polish? So one of our fans actually took a picture of it, and it's in italics. So the stuff that she's cursing in Polish is in italics versus.
And it's not just cursing.
It wasn't just. Yeah,
there are a few just aphorisms, expressions.
She
doesn't really. I don't think she's fluent in Polish, but she can have a conversation with her mom on and off in Polish.
About food mostly.
Yeah.
I was wondering, just sort of with the state of the literary world and the fact that you do create these really wonderful, specific characters, especially Sparkle and baby Mike, who were also in First Cut. Did you all have sensitivity readers? Like, is that, yeah? Will you tell me what that's like? Maybe explain to people what a sensitivity reader is.
Well, first we should explain Sparkle is also based on a real person.
Really?
His name is Sparkle.
Whose name is Sparkle, which is the best name.
Who is a
Sparkle
bail
a friend of mine in Oakland. Yeah. And I actually befriended her because I was going to her office to, she was a notary and she notarized an affidavit I needed. And then we started chatting, and it turned out that I had performed the autopsy on a family member of hers. And then we just kind of became friendly, and I would visit her and her office was near mine.
Our Sparkle's
So
physical appearance is based on Sparkle Kelly.
But Sparkle Kelly was in Oakland, and we just moved her to San Francisco for the.
And also everything else about her personality is largely invented, except her doggedness as a detective.
Oh, her
the real Sparkle Kelly is a very good detective also, which is something that you do when you run a bail bond.
Oh, and the real Sparkle's hysterical and has such great sense of style.
I don't think there's a baby Mike, though.
There is no baby Mike. No, that we made up.
But the sensitivity readers are.
But he's kind of based on your cousin.
My cousin Patrick, and Patrick is watching. Patrick, my cousin, I've watched him pick up refrigerators just himself, just pick them up and carry them into a house, because that is his job. Yes.
This is baby Patrick, your cousin. Okay.
That's right. He's my little cousin. Yes. But we do have the sensitivity readers are among the beta readers.
Yeah.
So beta readers are people who read an early draft of a book or even just part of the book when you need specific advice. Yeah. So we had a beta reader about some of the genetics, for instance, the genetic science.
To make sure that was accurate.
That Judy knows, but she wanted to make sure that she got everything about the testing of it right. You know, we have a buddy of mine who's a contractor in San Francisco
for the construction stuff,
for the construction scene things.
Did you have someone Irish help you with the Irish?
Yes. Now that was a challenge. We have so in the book there is a character from Galway, from Ireland, who is in his 40s now. I grew up with my grandparents at home who were both from Galway and who spoke Hiberno English, right? The Irish have a specific way of speaking English, except that I realized when I started writing this character, Dennis, the Hiberno English that I know is 100 years old.
It's his grandfather.
Yeah, I mean, my grandparents were born at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's really changed. So we put a lot of work into trying to represent the way an actual contemporary Irish person would speak without being, a leprechaun like cliche.
But that was also
top of the morning, yeah.
She's probably watching. It was through your cousin.
Yeah, so we had a couple of different Irish people read the book and make sure that the book.
Yeah. You all are so multi-culty. You have like focus groups built in to make it.
We sort of do,
yeah.
And then the sensitivity reader is
that was Judith Williams, who actually we went to college with also.
From our class.
Yeah, Judith is this is part of her profession, is what she does.
In case people don't know what a sensitivity reader does, I think it's a fairly new role. I think it is. And how would you describe what a sensitivity reader does?
So they read through the text to make sure that your descriptions are accurate, that you're not, for instance, describing the skin tones on only the black and brown people and not describing the skin tones on the white people, things like that. And just picking up on certain language use that could potentially offend people or could be misinterpreted as being insulting or offensive that you might, as a white person, wouldn't necessarily be aware of.
And try to get outside some of the cliches that are already there in the genre. Yeah. We didn't want Sparkle to be the sassy black sidekick.
Yeah, that's not.
It was very important that she be a real person,
character.
A real character. And Judith helped us with that quite a lot. Yeah.
And especially since she's based on a real person too. I mean, that's the other thing is just because you're basing someone on an actual person that you have a relationship with doesn't mean that as a writer, you've done them justice. And that's where a sensitivity reader can really help you with the editing process.
What strikes me about Aftershock is there's so much, because you are tackling issues with immigration and showing readers how unfair the system is. You're throwing open some noble parts of the legal system, right? We meet some really, really great defense attorneys who really, really care, and also showing how corrupt the system is. There's also a very touching storyline about a homeless person in Aftershock as well. And all of it, there's so much heart there with the way you're telling the story, and it's so germane. It's so authentic. It doesn't feel like you're trying to make 52 statements with this. It just feels like this is what life is like in an American city.
And that comes straight from my work.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
that's the bottom line, is like every single day I have the privilege and the honor of performing death investigations on people who have died suddenly and violently. And sometimes they're wealthy, and sometimes they're poor, and sometimes they're homeless, and sometimes they're mentally ill. And I have to be able to understand their stories and be able to explain their death to their family members. So that's a skill set that I've developed over 20 years of doing this. And it's working with TJ that, you know, he allows me to be able to write it in such a way so that people can understand the emotional burden that takes on the forensic pathologist, but also on the other characters in the forensic pathologist's life.
Yeah, and the ripple effects. It's very important to us that the deaths are not throwaways.
No, they're not.
That every act of violence that we portray comes from someplace, and has a motivation, and has consequences, in places where you might not imagine that it would, because that's the way it is in real life.
I'm gonna go to, if anyone who's watching has questions, there's a Q&A, you can throw them in there. I think we kind of touched on this, but Nitz Velez, do you know who Nitz Velez?
Oh, Nitzette, hi. Hi, Nitz.
Wants to know, is there a backstory to how you decided on the name for the main character?
Jesse, yes.
There is.
Yeah, yes.
It's kind of funny.
So Jane Tiska is a photographer for the Oakland Tribune. And she came and photographed me when I first moved to the Oakland office. They were just opening up the office, and they had a photographer from the Tribune come and take photos. And so I took her out to lunch afterward, just because she had spent the whole day photographing me while we were doing autopsies for the paper. And as we started chatting, I found out that she was Polish, and her last name Tiska is a Polish name. And we were creating the character, but we didn't have a last name for her yet. And I was like, can I borrow your last name? We'll just change one letter, because hers, I think, is T.Y.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually friends on Facebook, for those of you who follow us on Facebook. So she's a fantastic photographer.
Jessie, we just met a woman on a plane named Jessie.
Yes.
And there was something about her that I just really, we
and
both
she
really
was
liked
Jessie,
the name.
Jesse, which we were fascinated with, like Jesse James. So it was the male spelling.
The male version, yeah.
Right. And we wanted to have a name that could be potentially mistaken for a man. We didn't
at first. We changed it. Yeah.
I think we had some idea or some plot line associated with that, but then we changed it.
Yeah,
but
and we just
some
like
lady on a plane.
Jessie Tiska sounds good. It's just it rolls off the tongue.
Really
We
well.
liked that, and then also that way we could come up with her actual given name of Czesława, because the nickname for Czesława is Czesha.
Yeah,
which could get
like
changed to Jessie, like Judy. Judy's given
that's not my name.
Her name on
Yehudit.
Judy's name is Yehudit.
Yeah,
and on her naturalization papers in the United States, making her a citizen, it says Judy.
No, it says Yehudit on the naturalization papers, but on my passport it says Judy. So I grew up with two different names. I grew up with Yehudith, Yehudith. And then everybody calls me Judy. So that's the similarity.
Well, the next time you're on stage with two male doctors who call you Judy, be like, no, that's, what is it? Yehudit. Yeah. And this same friend, say, it's not Nitz. How do you say his or her name?
Nitzette is her full name, but she goes by Nitz. Yeah.
Okay. She wants to know, she's asking about how one writes a book. She says, I get especially stuck at the how do I protect patient confidentiality while still providing details? Are there legal aspects? This is a very inside baseball question. I like it.
Yeah, yes. When writing fiction, you don't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah,
because
so
you just
fiction,
change the
you're
details.
just, you change, you're making stuff up. So
we dealt with that more in working.
Yeah, that was more of an issue when you're writing nonfiction, because in nonfiction, in order for it to be considered nonfiction, you need to be able to write about actual people, but you have to change key things or get their consent. It's one or the other. So for forensic
of dead people.
So that's the thing. Forensic pathology is one of those specialties where if you die suddenly, violently, or unexpectedly, and your name is in the paper, there's no expectation of privacy because your name was in the paper because you died suddenly, violently, and unexpectedly. So as a result, it kind of exempts you to some degree from some of the consent requiring processes that a doctor would need if, for example, they're writing about their patients, like Oliver Sacks, for instance, who wrote Awakenings and
Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
Exactly. So he gets consent from all of his
But
patients.
you also have the protection, if you're a nonfiction writer, you have the protection of the First Amendment,
Right.
which is you, as long as you're not lying about someone or
Yeah.
defaming someone, you can report what you did.
And your
especially
I
depending
know
on
this because I wrote a memoir.
Yeah.
and you get a legal read. So once it's
Yeah.
published, then of course there's also a legal read that goes through the publishers to make sure that you're not defaming anybody or there's anything that
But
needs to
in
be
our
changed.
fiction, we take aspects of what Judy does,
Yeah,
but we
they're
have
not
not
exact cases.
actually reproduced a case that she really
No.
did on
It's
the autopsy.
inspired by some cases. They're inspired by.
We have your people here want to know about process. How long, start to finish, was the entire process of writing Aftershock?
Year and a half?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so you're human. If you told me it was like less than 6 months, I'd have to throw this at you.
No. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. We were very
Yeah.
fortunate that our brilliant literary agent, Jessica Papan, got us a 2-book deal to
Yeah.
write novels. So
So
when
if-
we wrote First Cut, a book like this is out of your hands for months while it's in the hands of other professionals. So once it was out of our hands and locked out for like, we don't need
When
to make
they're
any
editing
changes
it.
about it, we could start right in on Aftershock, and that's
Right.
what we did.
That's why I have to get him to do it though, because then he's like, oh my God, it's out of my hands. What do I do? I'm like, you're working on the next book now.
It is very daunting to start a new book
Right.
because it takes it's a lot of work, and then just thinking, oh my gosh, are we going to go through that again?
Yes, we
Yeah.
are.
You
We
need
are.
you need to get another rabbit. There needs to be some
Yeah.
rabbits.
Well, rabbits are
You're
not
right.
allowed. You can't bring rabbits into
Right.
New Zealand.
Can you get one there?
You
No,
can
they
get
want
them
you to
here.
take their sheep, I think.
Yeah. No,
All right.
they're pests here is
Yeah.
the problem. Yeah.
Have you started this is from Evelina. Miss
Evelina!
Evelina! Yes.
There you go.
Oh, these are all people we know.
yeah.
Evelina was our beta reader,
reader for
for
Polish.
the
Oh!
Polish
Thank you,
words and
Evelina.
phrases. Evelina Mistek. Dr. Evelina Mistek.
Doctor.
Dr. Mistek has an alpha question. Did you start working on the new book about Czeslawa Teska?
Yes, we have.
We're already working on it.
Yes.
Yes.
We have no shortage of deaths, Faith, to explore.
We're full of
We have
ideas.
stacked up. Yeah.
And this TJ says, that's Judy.
Yeah.
We're always thinking.
Right.
Yeah, so we go for walks and we come up with plot ideas. So we have plots for at least the next 3 books.
Yeah.
Good Lord, you're going to be so fit with your walks and talks. Daniel Mitchell.
Hi, Danny.
Hi, Danny.
There you go. He wants to know, how do you map out the protagonist's character arc throughout a story? I know you do walks. I know you make dinner. I know you read it. I'm sure there's more to it than that.
Yeah. Oh no. Honestly, we don't really map it out. It develops. I would say. I would say that the
does,
character
yeah.
arc develops along with the plot elements in our
Yeah.
books.
I mean, I think the character arc is more one of throughout from book 1 to book 2 to book 3. I mean, like we have an idea
yes.
of where her character is going to develop, because the first book, First Cut, was she's straight out of fellowship. So she's young and green and doesn't quite know what she's doing. And now in book 2, which is Aftershock, she's a little bit more experienced.
And a little more cynical.
Yes.
It's a darker. It's a darker.
It's a
book
darker
than
book,
First Cut
and
is.
she's also the deputy chief, so she's got authority, but she doesn't have any control. So it's that difficult position where when you're not chief, but you're deputy chief. So all the shit goes downhill, as they say.
But then again, that was also
yeah.
a big advantage of being able to think about 2 books at once,
Right.
because we already knew that was how Jesse was going to end up in the second book, so we could write that into the first book.
Can you tell us anything about place for next book? And also, like in First Cut, I learned about cryptocurrency, and I learned about drugs, and Silicon Valley. And then we learned about immigration, learned about architecture and building and real estate. In this book, what's next?
But we're not going to tell you that. But we will give you some rough ideas that eventually Jessie is going to probably move to the East Bay of San Francisco, like Judy did in
Oakland.
her career.
Yeah.
She might even end up as a full-time consultant, which essentially makes her a private investigator, and then we can write PI novels.
We'd like to bring her back to the East Coast.
We'd like to bring her back to Lynn, yes.
We'd like to set one in Lynn, so that way she can visit Nahant. So if there are any Nahant Mitchells watching, that we'd like to do that.
We might do that. And we were always, we sort of wanted to bring her to Hawaii because we love Hawaii, but we're going to bring her to New Zealand.
Basically any
Thank you.
We're going to end up in New Zealand at some point.
Okay, because Lissa Carlino wants to know if you're going to bring her to New Zealand. So.
Yes.
Well, for Lissa, we would, yes.
We would like to. That will be at some point in the future if we're fortunate enough to continue to write and publish these books.
Judy, I was wondering, in New Zealand, which has, I think we hear in the news that, is it Prime Minister? It's Jacinda
Ardern. She's the Prime Minister.
She's really led the way on much stricter gun laws, right?
Yes.
So are deaths in New Zealand very different than deaths in America?
Yes. So in the past, I've been here for 6 months and I've only done, I think, 2 or 3 gunshot wound deaths in 6 months. I would typically get 3 in 2 weeks in Oakland and San Francisco. So in terms of overall gun deaths, much, much lower.
And those are not homicides.
And they're not homicides. Well, 1 was a homicide, 2 are suicides. And then in terms of the general caseload, a lot heavier on natural deaths. So I see a lot more heart disease, lung disease from smoking, and I see just a lot fewer overdoses, a lot fewer motor vehicle accidents, a lot fewer traumatic injuries in general.
There are still plenty of guns in New Zealand, but they're long guns. They're hunting rifles.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, it's a largely rural country, and there are a lot of hunters, but there aren't handguns.
Yeah. Judy, I think you're going to have to say goodbye to your bullet emboli. You're just not going to see a lot of those in New Zealand.
No, but I mean, but there are challenging cases. I mean, I still do get homicides here, not as frequently as the States, but I do get them. And I think my expertise is definitely needed just because when you have a country that doesn't have that many homicides, the police are less experienced in investigating them. So I think that they rely upon the forensic pathologists to really help them in terms of figuring out what questions that need to be asked or what avenues to investigate.
We have a few more minutes. I want to remind everyone that both of you are on Twitter, and Judy, you have almost 51,000 Twitter followers. What do you think draws people to follow you? I mean, obviously you have a fascinating life, and you've written a bestseller together, or several. And I know that a year or 2 ago, a tweet went really viral about staying in your lane when it came to, was that gun death?
It was about gun violence. Yeah. So what happened was the American College of Emergency Physicians, I believe, ACEP, had put out a policy that recommended that emergency doctors talk to their patients about gun violence in their lives to make sure that the guns are safe, especially if they're suicidal or having homicidal tendencies, or if they're at risk for domestic violence, for instance, that it's a responsibility of the physician to treat guns as a potential hazard for their patients and ask about it. And the NRA did not like that one bit and had tweeted out some nasty thing about doctors should stay in their lane on gun violence. And then every single doctor in the United States who's treated a patient with as a result of gun violence, including surgeons, pediatricians, OBGYNs, oncologists have even radiologists.
Everybody.
I mean, because they've all had patients who, in addition to having whatever disease process, or maybe it's the pediatrician, it's their age, they had patients who have had impact from gun violence. And so they were all talking back to the NRA and tweeting back to the NRA.
Especially forensic pathologists too, because the NRA was trying to say that doctors aren't experts in gun violence. Nobody is more of an expert in terminal ballistics than this
forensic
person who
pathologist.
takes the bodies,
You
the
know,
bullets out of actual bodies.
I'm the one who goes to court, who gets, testifies and is sworn in as an expert by the judge. I've never, in any court case I've ever done where I've testified on behalf of the prosecution on a gun death, have I ever seen anybody from the NRA there. I'm the one who explains what bullets do and how they went through and what the trajectory is and what the range of fire, the distance is. That's my job, to be an expert on guns.
So they managed to tick off a lot of doctors.
Yeah. And so that was the issue for me. It was just like, and that particular week when that tweet went viral, I had done homicide earlier in the week, and then I was going in that morning to do a suicide of a young man who had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and I was mad. I mean, I don't normally curse on Twitter, publicly, embarrassed like my mother-in-law there. But I mean, I just basically said, this isn't just my lane, this is my effing highway, because I deal with it every single day. And so when the press called, and I was more than happy to explain what the job is of a forensic pathologist with regards to gun violence and why it really is a public health issue, and doctors do have a role in speaking out about it. And it's not even a Second Amendment issue, because we're not trying to take away people's guns. What we're trying to do is decrease the mortality and morbidity, the injury to people's bodies from guns.
Drew Gould, is this okay?
Cousins.
My cousin.
The whole family's here.
All people we know. Yeah,
I love it. Has a great question. Do you think you'll write anything in the future inspired by the COVID pandemic?
That is a great question, Drew, and we don't know.
We are actively debating this.
Yeah, we don't know. We're going to have that discussion with Glenn, our editor, and see if we are going forward with the series, then what role COVID is going to play in it.
What I'd like to see is I'd like to see it in the background. Because just like Aftershock, the earthquake is there, but it's not the primary story. The primary story is a standard mystery of a death of an individual. I'd like to do the same thing where we have a mystery, we have a death of an individual, and oh yeah, by the way, there's also COVID in the background. Like, we have to do that as well. And so that way it'll give people an inside look of how a medical examiner does their work, in addition to having to deal with the stresses of a multiple fatality incident.
It's still a little early to say what readers want to read about
I don't know if
COVID
people would
fiction,
want to read about
in
COVID
detective
right
fiction,
now.
or is it like the musicals in the 1930s where nobody wanted to know what was going on in the in the Depression? They wanted some escapism. Maybe people want escapism in their detective novels.
We'll see.
We don't know yet.
We'll figure it out. We're working on it.
This series is made for the screen.
Yes, it is.
From your mouth to Hollywood's years.
There you go. Is there anything you can tell us that's in the works?
A few people have reached out, some of them, from our college, that we have some connections, but we're waiting to hear if anything pans out from that. I mean, I think we definitely have an eye to making it cinematic to some degree. I mean, T.J. worked for years in the film industry.
The book is dedicated
to Jack Briley.
My mentor, Jack Briley, John Richard Briley, who was a screenwriter who passed away last year. And
T.J. worked for him for years.
Yeah, Jack was a brilliant writer. He won an Academy Award for Gandhi. He won a Golden Globe for Cry Freedom. And what I learned from him, which I didn't even realize I was learning it from him just by working for him, was how to tell a story through dialogue. And so I think that the books are very cinematic, just because that's the type of writing that I had been steeped in while working for Jack.
I know we need to wrap this up. I'm hoping people will bear with us, because so many people here know you and love you so much, because you mentioned your mentor, TJ, and Judy, you recently tweeted that mentorship matters. And I was wondering if there's a really lovely, it's a short scene, but there's this really lovely scene in the book where Dr. Teska, who is young herself, notices a particularly perspicacious medical student named Patty Alvarez, and really connects with her, and really in the short time they have together really tries to sort of mentor her and support her. And it's a lovely, you don't shine a huge light on it, but it's like a lovely little scene, also of women helping women. And so is mentorship especially meaningful for forensic pathologists?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the thing is that the funny thing is about this field is that there's so few people who want to go into it. I know that from watching television, you think that there's a forensic pathologist in every corner, but it really is so many years of training that we really don't have enough people going into the field. So one way that I can draw more people into the field and fix the staffing issues that we have, to at least, individually, I think it's important for me to reach out and mentor students. And I'm hopeful that some of the people out there who are watching are students of mine that I love, and who you are, because I've had them come and shadow me in the morgue. We've done research projects together, and the three of you who are working on research projects that I haven't gotten back to yet, I do have it in my inbox. I will do it. So it's really something that's so important to me. I love being able to inspire students to go into this field because it's so much fun, and they have a great time, and it helps them move on in their careers, whether they're going into science or they end up going to medical school.
And if you're an aspiring novelist, I can advise you to marry a nice Jewish doctor. It works out really well.
That's simple.
Helps pay the bills, at least. Writing is not as lucrative as you'd think.
Jessie tells her students during an autopsy, we don't draw conclusions until we've gathered all the data. And I was wondering, do you live that way in every part of your life, Judy? Are you slow to draw conclusions? Your husband might have something to say.
That's a Hirschism, really. I mean, So Dr. Hirsch was my mentor, just like T.J. gave credit to Jack Briley. Charles Hirsch, Zichrono Livracha, he passed away a few years ago, was my mentor at the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. And we actually left, when I finished fellowship, I had a list of all of his expressions and Hirschisms is what we called them. And I reused them myself. Things like, you solve more cases with a telephone than with a microscope. That's a Hirschism. The death certificate is written on paper, not on stone. It can be changed. So that's.
Did we also say, because this is a line in the book, the bodies will still be there tomorrow?
Yes.
Well, that's not Hirsch. That was somebody else in your office. That's John Lucas. That was John Lucas.
That's John Lucas. He's the chief forensic pathologist for LA County right now.
Yeah.
They'll still be dead tomorrow.
They'll still be dead tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a number one.
Motto.
It's very important that you never have to rush.
I just want you to know, we have to wrap it up. I want you to know that Lissa Carlino says that the USA cannot have you back. We love having Judy and T.J. in New Zealand. Lissa, I don't want to have to wrestle you. We all can't wait till you come back. In the meantime, please keep writing things for us to read. It is such, it's amazing. Technology is amazing. It feels like you're so close. I see on the clock behind you. Is it almost tea time? Is it almost 10 after 4?
Yeah, you're right.
After 4.
That's absurd. So I'm just going to try. I think exactly. Just text me and tell me how the tea tastes tomorrow, please. I think I'm going to say thank you correctly. Is it dziękuję?
Dziękuję.
Dziękuję. The only other thing I know in Polish, because at one point my kids had a nanny from Poland, was daj buzi.
The bougie?
Doesn't that mean give me a kiss?
Was that to give her a kiss?
Hold on, somebody in this chat who speaks Polish is going to have
to.
See, right, remember, we don't speak Polish.
We have to get TJ.
Yes, give me a kiss. Okay, all right, good. All right, daj buzi. I think our friend Erica is going to hop back on and remind folks how to buy books. TJ and Judy, we miss you. I'm so happy to get to talk to you. And Mazel Tov.
Toda rabba.
Thank you very much, Faith.
Thank you, everyone, for such a wonderful discussion. We have signed copies of Aftershock that you can get in store and on our website at greenapplebooks.com while supplies last. Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Erica.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Green Apple. We love you.
Bye.
Love you.
Bye. Okay.